What's happening, YouTube? It's Simon466cards, and today we're going to talk about the impact of the Trump presidency on the card market. For this video, I will try to keep it as apolitical as I can. I'm focusing on just the economic impact of the proposed policies that he's talked about. And specifically in this video, I'm going to talk about the impact on the value of the US dollar and also as a result of that foreign exchange. On your screen, you can see I'm on the BNN Bloomberg website. They are a business news network here in Canada. That's what the BNN stands for. And they've merged or partnered up with Bloomberg a few years back here. And so they have a daily newsletter that they publish every single day that gives you 5 things to know about in the market each day. And so if you're in Canada, or even if you're not, sign up for this newsletter if you want 5 things to know about. I find it very helpful to simplify what's happening in the market. So you can see here are 5 things you need to know this morning. This is from November the 6th, 2024, the day after the election, when Trump obviously won and will be elected. And so 5 things you need to know about after Trump wins. The US dollar is gaining steam. Very straightforward. This was on November the 6th, and this is where I got the idea for this video. Fast forward a week to November the 11th. You can see here, that's bad news for oil in and of itself, but it's being made even worse because it's priced in US dollars, which has been rallying ever since last week's US election. So just amplifying what was said here about the US dollar going up in value, that's what this sentence is saying here a week later. And so if you're wondering, how much did the US dollar go up? Well, I'm recording this video on November the 14th, and the election was on November the 5th. This is I'm showing on the screen here, it's called the Dixie. It's the US dollar index, DXY. That's why it's called the Dixie. And November 5th was the election. And so the Dixie was at about 103.5 on November the 5th, the day of the election. On November the 14th, it is now 106.8. So it's up about 3%. The US dollar as a whole is up 3% since the election, which doesn't sound like much, but for an entire currency to go up that much in a week, that's a lot. Now, if we go to the US dollar versus Canadian dollar exchange and how much that's gone up in the last week and a half since the election, again, November 5th, the US dollar was worth 138.50, 1.385-ish, 1.384 Canadian, and now it's up to 140.5. So that's roughly 3%. If you look at the euro, it's the same thing. November 5th, right around 91.5 cents to now 94.5. So again, roughly 3%. And lastly, the British pound, November the 5th, was 76 and change, 76.6, and now it's at 78.9, so almost 79 cents. So it's roughly 3%. Again, you're thinking, well, 3%, how much more can it go up, right? Like it's already moved 3% in the week and a half since. Well, I'm going to talk to you about a little thing that happened called Brexit, which is just, to be frank, one of the dumbest decisions a country has ever made for their country. And 2015, this is a brief history lesson here. 2015, they announced that they were going to create a referendum on this and decide whether or not in 2016 whether they would leave the EU. And so if we go back to that, this decision was mentioned or was a result of a general election in May of 2015 for a referendum in 2016. If we go back, this is the US dollar versus British pound. If we go back, again, May 2015 is here. It was worth roughly 63 cents. A year later, June of 2016, when the actual referendum happened, it was up to 77 cents. So basically, these type of decisions matter. The British pound decreased in value by 20% within a year because of their decision to leave the European Union. I just want to set that as context for how much the value of a currency, of a country's currency, can change because of policy. And obviously, Brexit was a huge shift, but it moved down in this case by 20% within a year. I just want you to keep that in mind when I talk about what the impact of a Trump presidency could mean for the US dollar. Like, I'm not talking 1 or 2%. It's already moved 3% within a week and a half. So something like this, you can't rule it out, where it goes up by 15-20%. You cannot rule it out based off of what he has proposed and talked about. Whether he does it, who knows? Maybe he doesn't, and it's a muted impact. But it's on the table that it could be this big of an impact, 15, 20, maybe even more percent increase in the value of the US dollar. And why does that matter? Well, let's jump into that, right? I'm doing an economics 101, maybe a 201. I forget what year foreign exchange or FX it was taught in my economics classes, because it was a long time ago. But I will walk you through how this impacts sports cards and why the US dollar matters. So a very simple way to say it is, if the value of US dollar increases, that means it's the relative value, right? Relative to other currencies. And so that means the US dollar is worth more in other currencies. So the example we just went over here versus the Canadian dollar, it went up from 1.3833 Canadian dollars to 1.4067, right? So roughly 2% more. So a US dollar a week ago, November 5th, compared to November 11th, could buy 2% more on November 11th than you could on November the 5th. That's the really simplistic way to explain that. Now, if the US dollar increases, anything that's denominated in US dollars will be worth more in other currencies because of the higher foreign exchange rate. So some examples of that. Oil, that is denominated in US dollars. So a gallon or a barrel of oil is worth, let's say, $70 US. If it's worth $70 US a week from now, it doesn't affect people in the US because you use American dollars. But if you're in Canada and it's worth $70 last week and it's worth $70 this week, but the FX rate has changed, then it's actually worth $70 plus 2%. So like $71.40 a week later because of the shift in the US dollar. That's what I'm talking about here. Another thing that was denominated in US dollars, gold. Something else, Bitcoin, which if you've seen some of the moves on that, that is part of it. There are some other things he's doing, but that is part of it. And lastly, what else is denominated in US dollars? Sports cards. And that's the impact that I want to talk about. Well, if we're talking about cards impacted by the US dollar and the increase in the expected increase in the value of the US dollar and thus the impact of foreign exchange, well, what types of cards will be impacted? If we think about a Michael Jordan card, a Michael Jordan rookie card, it's an item that's denominated in US dollars, but the United States is also the main market, so it's going to have a minor impact. It's US dollars in a US market. It doesn't really do much. But if we think about something like a soccer card, in this case it's a Messi rookie card, that is an item that is denominated in US dollars because that's what all sports cards are denominated in. But it has foreign countries, Europe as a major example, as a major market. So it will have a major impact on the card because of this US dollar foreign exchange thing that I've talked about. And so if we simplify this down to which cards that would increase in foreign currency value due to FX, this is the list or the criteria that I'm going to talk about. And I think the impact is it might cause holders of these cards to take some profits and sell, because if the value of their cards have gone up in their local currency because of the value of the US dollar, if let's say your card has gone up by 15, 20, 30% just because of foreign exchange, that might cause you to sell it and you want to just take the profit and run. The card in US dollars has not changed in value at all, but the card in the euro or the British pound or the Canadian dollar has increased by 15, 20, 25, 30%. Then you're like, absolutely, give me that extra 20, 30%. Let me sell this card off right now. That's what I mean. And so which cards might be impacted by a strong US dollar? Well, any cards that are sold or have a market or a major market outside of the United States. Hockey, obviously in Canada, Europe, for soccer, and then Ohtani obviously has a big card market in the US, but also has a big overseas card market. So Ohtani, maybe. Pokemon? I don't know too much about it, but obviously has a big overseas market. And then lastly, I'm wondering whether or not higher end card markets will be impacted more, or higher end cards will be impacted more, because if you have a card that's worth $50 and the US dollar goes up by 20%, and as a result in Canadian dollars or euros or British pounds or whatever, it is now actually worth 60 Canadian dollars rather than 50 Canadian dollars. It's gone up by 20%. That doesn't really do much for you, right? If it goes up from 50 pounds to 60 pounds, it doesn't do too much for you. But if it's 5,000 pounds to 6,000 pounds, or 5,000 Canadian dollars versus 5,000 Canadian, or 5,000 Canadian dollars to 6,000 Canadian dollars, that might make you sell it. And so I'm wondering if this will have a bigger impact on higher end cards rather than lower end cards. Because again, 15, 20% increase is not going to change the world. It might not change your decision making much, but if it's from 5,000 to 6,000, it might. So that's where I'm landing with this video, that I believe cards with major markets outside of the US, so that's things like hockey and soccer and specific athletes like Ohtani and maybe Pokemon, those are the ones that might actually go down because people that hold them in foreign countries might take advantage of the strong US dollar to take profits and sell. And I think this might also impact higher end cards more because there's just a larger impact in terms of an absolute dollar amount versus like a $50 to $60 card. You know, going from $50 to $60, maybe I don't know that someone's gonna be selling to capture those type of profits. Anyways, that is the video. Would love to hear your thoughts and comments on the validity of what I've explained here, but also, are there other economic impacts that I haven't talked about here? For example, other things that might happen as a result of some of the policies and some of the tariffs that he's talked about. I should also mention, if Ohtani, goes out and wins another MVP and wins another World Series and saves a bunch of babies from a burning building, chances are his card market's not going to go down, right? So that type of individual performance will overwhelm anything that is caused by FX and US dollars and economic policy. But all else being equal, this is what I believe would be an impact of the Trump presidency. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you as always for listening and watching. I'll talk to you all soon. Cheers.